Okay, welcome to the Aging, Longevity, and Wellness course for the Kresge Institute. I think this will be a really important course for everyone that's attending. And a lot of times you go to a course, and sometimes the course is designed for a patient population you're seeing all the time. Maybe working with autoimmune disease courses, the autoimmune course really fit into your practice. But this course on aging, longevity, and wellness is information that I think you'll find very, very useful for yourself, for your loved ones, for your family members, for your aging loved ones. And the principles also apply to really working with chronic patients. So the way the course is organized is we're going to really go into some basic concepts of aging physiology, and then we're going to go into what's actually happening with the pathophysiology of aging, and then we're going to get into wellness or non-disease or prevention of disease states, how to identify early disease with different types of laboratory and medical workup evaluations. And then we're going to talk about nutraceuticals that have been shown to impacting aging physiology. Then we're going to get into dietary lifestyle strategies that impact aging and risk for disease development during the aging process. And then we'll go through how to go through an evaluation applying these principles, then how to put together a treatment plan, individualized plan, and then we'll do some case studies. So as we get into the first concept, the clinical application of the concepts of geroscience and longevity medicine, this is what I want to get into. So geroscience means geriatric science. It's really the science of what happens when we're aging. And it's totally different than functional medicine in its sense, that it's really looking at even pathways that are taking place that are leading to dysfunctions, which we then see in functional medicine. So I think if you're not familiar with it, it's really important for you to understand those concepts. Now, number one, we're going to implement strategies for your own health and your loved ones. So we're trying to get this course, do you know how to do an annual exam? Do you know how to identify potential cancer early for yourself? Do you really trust someone's going to find it for you? Do you have a strategy to look at all the different risk factors that are out there? Are you doing your own workups or someone else doing it for you? What's being happening? Because the annual physical exam today is terrible. And, do you know how to go through that process of looking for the most common diseases? So we're going to get into that in detail. And then you want to identify patterns of early disease in your practice, how to incorporate those principles into your practice. Part of longevity is to make sure you catch disease early and prevent it from expressing. And then understand the concepts of geroscience. And geroscience is the pathophysiology of why cells start to fail. Why does a person not respond to care? So if you take a 30-year-old with the condition and have an 80-year-old with the same exact condition, let's say they both have leaky gut, who do you think is going to respond faster? And why would the 80-year-old not respond as fast? What's happening? What are those mechanisms? And what about a 50-year-old that's now looking like an 80-year-old when it comes to certain clinical applications? So that's where we're going to get into. Now, reality check. When was the last time a patient or client goal working with you was to find a way to improve the longevity? When was the last time a patient came and goes, I feel totally great, I'm awesome, I feel fantastic, I just want to live longer, that's why I'm seeing you, right? And the reality is it doesn't happen. And if it does happen, something really went wrong. There's some kind of recent motivation to increase their lifespan. Maybe their twin brother died. Maybe someone they knew that was close to them died, and they were freaked out about their longevity all of a sudden. And if you really look at the requirements that's needed for longevity medicine, is you got to have that initial motivation to increase your lifespan. It's not something people think about on a regular basis. And there's got to be ongoing motivation to implement those strategies to increase lifespan. And then you have the financial resources to invest in preventive medicine predictive tests, which can get pretty expensive. And these aren't going to be covered by insurance. And then you have to have the financial resources to implement changes. And then you have to have lifestyle flexibility to implement those changes. And maybe it's hey, you need to reduce all stress and buy yourself a cold plunge and spend $10,000 there. And you need to get a trainer and you do all these things to make it work. And that's not feasible for a lot of people. So how realistic is longevity medicine for your practice? I think for most people, it's not. For most people that practice functional medicine, we typically get the practice where we're seeing people that are chronic, people that are not feeling well, they don't have disease yet, they're in the gray stages, they know where to go. We're not necessarily seeing people that are coming to us totally healthy and trying to extend their lifespan. However, what we can do, and we're going to do in this course, is really talk about the concept of geroscience. So geroscience can help you understand how aging physiology leads to disease comorbidity and how to develop effective clinical strategies. So the goal of this course is to understand longevity science and how it impacts chronic patients we see daily who not respond to normal interventions. And one of the things you always have to consider when you do a workup is, can I figure out what's going on? Do I have an understanding of what's going on with the patient's case? And then the next part of that is, do you think will they respond to care? So this is not longevity and wellness. Like Botox, just go on HRT, to have youthful peaks of hormones, different kind of wrinkle treatments, facial creams. That's appearance medicine. It's not wellness and longevity. So let's go over the things that really have been shown to make an impact. And the information that has been shown to make an impact on longevity is pretty commonly understood at this point. These are the main points. So, if you're out there listening to longevity experts or reading anything about it, we know that there's a big emphasis on caloric restriction, time-restricted feeding and fasting. We're going to go over those research concepts and also implementation, and then difference between time-restricted feeding and extended fasting. Another key thing is using a continuous blood sugar monitor to keep glucose under control, limiting sugars and overcooked and fried foods because they're oxidized. Obviously, don't smoke, use alcohol or tobacco products. Limit alcohol, exercise, try to increase your VO2 max or your cardiovascular fitness above average. Some people promote taking medications that improve longevity genes like metformin, rapamycin. Some people recommend taking medications preventing that lower cardiovascular risk, aspirin and statins. Take nutraceuticals that impact longevity genes like resveratrol, different types of thiamine. Take nutraceuticals that support methylation. Take senolytic supplements, avoid sunlight and radiation exposure, have a happy social life, sense of purpose, keep your brain active, sleep well, reduce stress, and eat a healthy diet. That's it. Those are the main principles of longevity medicine. Take these concepts, get some HRT, some natural testosterone, and then you're done. So we're done with the course. That's all you need to do. It's really that simple, right? So it's not. And I'm being a little facetious, but I'm trying to get to the point. Those concepts are all important. These concepts are all important, okay? But we have to talk about where they apply into clinical practice, how do we implement them, how they impact our cases, and what does it really mean in a real clinical setting. Now let's go over some different models, and let's make sure we understand what we're doing. So people use the term anti-aging medicine or longevity medicine or preventive medicine, wellness medicine, functional medicine, without really understanding what they mean. So in the context of this course, anti-aging medicine we're going to refer to it as the medicine that's focused on youthful appearance and function with aging, right? This is where people, I don't know if you've ever gone to an anti-aging conference, you're going to see like everyone has their hair colored, everyone's on steroids, everyone's got lip fillers, everyone's got Botox all over. And I say everyone, I mean like all the physicians there. It's like, okay, you're getting older, just face it. You don't need to try to keep looking like you're younger and, probably wearing an earring and t-shirt and jeans that are tight when you're 60. This isn't working. But that's the anti-medicine account, if you guys ever been, okay? That's not what we're focused on. Then you have the longevity medicine group, and that's really focused on extending lifespan. We definitely want to talk about that. Extending lifespan is very important. There are certain variables that have an impact on that. One of the main ones, the most important ones, is identifying early disease, right? Like, here's a question for you. Do you have cancer? Do you know if you have cancer right now? How would you know? You can scan your whole body. When will early cancer show up on lab tests? What kind of markers will you see? Do you do that check? You get that checked on a regular basis? So that's essential for longevity medicine, but also falls into place of what's called wellness medicine. And wellness medicine is not having disease. So longevity medicine is expanding your lifespan, which includes wellness medicine, which is to not have disease. And if you don't have disease, then you want to be able to have the healthiest lifespan you can without any kind of morbidity, without any symptoms, without any chronic conditions. And those are the mechanisms that we're going to really focus on. Now, in the field of geroscience, like geriatric science, the concept is that aging itself is a disease. And this is what the entire field of geroscience is investigating. And geroscience is a field of research that has its own journals, has its own departments at universities, and they're looking at what's happening with the aging physiology. And their belief is there's physiological things that are taking place, and the expression of those physiological things that are taking place is then leading into disease, right? All the chronic diseases. And the theory of geroscience is it's not like you get these separate diseases that are independent of each other, like whether you get dementia or cancer or start getting CVD or arthritis. They're not independent, separate diseases. They all have to do with some initial cellular changes, which they call the hallmarks of aging. So here's the model. We have genes, we have environment, genes combined with their environment, we have some changes that take place. And we're going to go into these in great detail. But things like stem cell exhaustion, altered intracellular communication, genetic instability, telomere attrition, epigenetic alterations, loss of proteostasis, dysregulated nutrient sensing, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, all these mechanisms, which we'll go into great detail, then start to impact our genes and our physiology, where we start getting chronic inflammation and aging. And then we end up with a list of diseases, one following another, and following another, as we go through the aging process. So their concept is we have to address these issues, change the expression of these hallmarks of aging to avoid this, which is different than functional medicine. Functional medicine is, you got chronic inflammation, you must have leaky gut. You must have food sensitivities. You must have environmental allergens. Let's go and treat those. And then geroscience is, but why do you have those? We have these because these other mechanisms may be impacting it. And there's a place to really merge both these concepts together in real clinical practices, what we'll do. So, like for example, everyone knows inflammation is a major issue for chronic illness and disease. But what happens in like the field of geroscience is, for example, throughout life, throughout different environmental exposures, different factors, you could have various variables that impact DNA, could damage DNA, your telomeres can shorten, we'll talk about that. Some changes in how your genes express, your mitochondria can become disrupted, and then a normal healthy cell becomes a senescent cell. Just think of it as a dysfunctional cell. It's not really going through cell division anymore. And then cells get exhausted, and then you have a lot of debris in tissue. So over time, we have cells that aren't functioning like the senescent cells, and they're there, they're just debris. And there's a term for this in the field of longevity medicine. They call it GARBA aging, like all this garbage dead cells in our body. And when they accumulate over time, our immune system has to get rid of it. And it creates these inflammatory responses to get rid of it, and they call that inflamm aging. Inflamm aging is the body's ability to get rid of all this cellular debris. And the more injury you've had to your tissues, the more toxic exposures you've had, the more inflammatory responses you've had that can damage your own tissue, the more garbage cells you have in your body. And the more garbage cells you have over your body, the more prone you are for inflamm aging. And if you don't sleep, so for example, you get rid of these garbage cells through sleep. So sleep it activates autophagy and you're able to sleep through. And that allows you to get rid of some of this debris. Take someone who's not sleeping, get someone who's like on a really high caloric intake, sites inflammatory, they're getting all this degenerative change taking place. Over a very short period of time, they can have this inflamm aging process take place, right? And you may have all seen that patient where you look, they come in, they're obviously inflamed. They have pain everywhere in their body, they have swelling, they have irritation. But when they get exposed to, let's say, dietary protein they're reactive to, like a little bit of milk, they get severe swelling and inflammation, like dramatic. Or if they try to go work out, they get into overtraining syndrome really, really easy. Or they just wake up with pain no matter what they do. And you're looking at all these different variables like food sensitivity panels and nutrient levels, and they'll all come back normal, and you're like wondering what's happening. Well, one of the mechanisms is this aging pathophysiology, this inflamm aging. And things like sleeping really well, things like fasting, intermittent, time-restricted feeding, but especially extended fasting, like 3 days can really turn on autophagy, where you can get rid of these dead debris cells. Those are the concepts that we want to get into. So our focus isn't like the patient coming in that says, hey, I want to look like I'm 20 and I want to, even though I'm 80 and I want to live to be 150 and I have no symptoms, and that's my goal. That's not our goal. Our goal is to apply these concepts into what we see every day. Here's a scenario. 50-year-old patient complains of chronic muscle pain and tightness, inability to recover from workouts, and general fatigue and pain. They spent the past 3 years working with functional medicine specialists with limited results. So, they maybe did a GI panel on them and tried to figure out their microbiome and gave them some gut support, because you should always start with the gut, right? And then they probably gave a handful of supplements one after the next, and ultimately this person just may have inflamm aging. They just may have all this debris in their cells. And unless they go into do several rounds, round after round after round after round of a 3-day fast, 3-day fast, 3-day fast, 3-day fast, they may not be able to get rid of that cellular garbage. And that's something that will be the difference between, in this case, succeeding and not succeeding. So that's the concept of geroscience applied to what we're going to see all of us in real practice. Here's another scenario. 60-year-old patient has noticed noticeable decline in her vision, memory, and physical stamina and cognitive function. Progression has been rapid for the past year. So this is the typical example of someone who is developing dementia. Early cognitive decline, mild cognitive impairment. Their cells are going the wrong way. They're getting lots of beta amyloid in their system. Their mitochondria are failing. They're losing probably their BDNF levels. They're not getting neuron connectivity. And they're on their way to dementia. But they're going to say, hey, with both these patients, hey, you're just getting older. That's why your body hurts. You're 58. Some people, it happens at 58. Some people it's a little bit later. But why? Well, the reason why is it goes back to these mechanisms. Right, so those are the things we want to discuss. So why is at 60 she's having some of these expressions, right? What are the mechanisms that can be addressed so we can slow this down? Here's another scenario you might see in your practice with these concepts we're going to apply. 64-year-old patient has had low white blood cells and symptoms of fatigue the past 2 years. He's consulted with his family physician and was told everything's fine. Like, this is a patient who may have malignancy. Well, everything's fine. We'll just monitor it. We'll just keep looking at it. We'll wait for or they say differently, we may wait for the tumor to get big enough so it can show. Or, there's something definitely impacting your immune system that we're just going to ignore for now. Yeah, some people just have low white blood cells, just the way it is. But I never had it before. Yeah, but you're getting older. That's the common thing. But you're getting older. So in a scenario like this could be like immunosenescence. Their immune system is fatiguing, they're failing, or there's some underlying pathology that's not being diagnosed early. So we're going to talk about concepts for cases like this. Here's another scenario. 53-year-old patient that reports they have become more reactive to foods and environmental allergens every year. They're starting to feel inflamed all the time despite trying to avoid food allergens and environmental triggers. This is another scenario where immunosenescence, their immune system is dysregulated, the Treg cells are not functioning. Maybe they can't repair their leaky gut as quick as they used to. Maybe they have some degree of inflammaging that's there. So these people can, get frustrated because they're constantly trying to do rotation diets and getting on foods and constantly support the leaky gut, but there's underlying mechanisms that may be part of it. So that's the focus of our course. This, in the next few lectures here and the concepts that we want to present in this course. It's not about trying to look like you're 20 when you're 80. Okay, that's not the focus. We're not doing anti-aging appearance medicine. And in realistic settings, real life scenario in practice, we're not getting patients walking into our office every single day that are telling us that, hey, I have this need to extend my lifespan. All of a sudden, what can I do about it? We're getting patients like this: chronic pain, early cognitive decline, white blood cells aren't there, they're not working, food sensitivities, feeling inflamed all the time, they're not responding to anything. And the concern is that maybe they're actually having these aging pathophysiological expressions that are leading to the things that we're seeing in functional medicine. So this is a really important course for all of us, for ourselves, and also for the chronic patients that we see. Now, the objective of this course is first understand hallmarks of aging physiology and geroscience and its role in chronic patients. So you got to understand the science, and then you got to understand how things impact the science, and then you got to understand how to implement those into clinical practice, right? Understand how to develop clinical strategies to impact aging pathophysiology. Learn how to identify breakdowns of physiological resiliency. The best way to see aging is loss of resiliency. When we say loss of resiliency, we mean like, I can't function if I lose sleep anymore. I have to sleep 8 hours or I don't function. I have to take 3 days off after a workout or 2 days after a workout. Those are all signs of loss of resiliency. I can only eat a limited amount of foods right now. I'm reacting to everything. Those are all losses of resiliency. I can't read for more than 20 or 30 minutes. That's loss of resiliency. So loss of resiliency is the key factor to really know if you're going down the pathological aging process. And the quicker you lose resiliency, the more often and the more frequent parts of resiliency you lose, the less likely you're going to live for extended periods of time. So we're going to talk about how to restore physiological resiliency. And when you look at the science between centenarians, individuals that are 100 above and older, there's one key thing they have. They have retained the resiliency. So resiliency is going to be a big thing for us. Learn how to conduct a comprehensive annual exam to identify disease as early as possible. So, do we want the Go to your healthcare professional. They ask you if you drink and smoke. Then they tell you that's bad. Then they tell you exercise and eat well. And then you end up with Lipitor and high blood pressure medication. And that's a very basic model. Like a little Chem 8, Chem 14, maybe with a little CBC and a lipid panel. It's not enough. Okay? It's not really doing what it needs to do. The goal of an annual physical exam is to identify disease as early as possible, not to identify the most obvious things that are very clear in an exam. The things that are silent, things that are not clear. So we're going to talk about how to look at those variables and how to identify them. Now, as we get into different parts of this course, let's make sure we get some definitions straight. So, mortality, the state of being mortal or destined, or death, right? So, destined to die. So, the state of being mortal or death, that's mortality, right? So, death. Morbidity, the condition of suffering from disease or medical condition, right? Just think of it as suffering. Mortality is death. Morbidity is suffering. Wellness is a stage of being free from disease. Now, people may have different definitions of wellness. The way we're using it and the way it's used in publications is just not having a disease. So that's what wellness is, okay? So wellness is just being disease-free. Longevity is in reference to lifespan. Aging is referred to as the process of gradual physiological deterioration. It's for sure 100% everyone's going to have some degree of physiological deterioration as they go through their years. Possible to avoid. Question is how fast, how aggressive, and how does it impact their quality of life? Health span. The period of life free of major disease and disability. So this is healthy, and that's different than, health span is different than lifespan. Lifespan is the period of healthy aging and period of disease. So everything combined together. So those are the main terms. Mortality, death, morbidity, suffering, wellness, no disease, longevity, your entire lifespan, aging, just concept of some degree of deterioration, health span, the time period with no disease, and your lifespan, the period of disease and disease-free time period, your entire life. Now, when you look at the concepts of longevity and morbidity, ideally, what you want is, let's say, the ideal age would be 100, right? You want to have no real morbidity. So this red line represents morbidity. It's like when you should have symptoms or suffering. So there's always going to be some degree of deterioration no matter what, right? But you're hoping that the degree of deterioration doesn't really impact your function. Before you start to lose morbidity, you get to be 100 years old and you die. That would be ideal for everyone, right? Now, a situation where things are not ideal would be someone who, if you look at their lifespan, morbidity starting at age 20 and increasing until death at age 60. So right at age 20, they start to get a chronic condition. They're suffering and getting worse and worse and worse and worse their whole life. And then age 60, they die. So that's a miserable life. If you look at example 1, it's a wonderful life. No morbidity, long age span, everything's great. And then morbidity, develop a chronic disease, some kind of chronic condition, and suffer all the way through until death at 60. And then here's another scenario, morbidity starting at age 50, and then they are suffering all the way to age 100. And this is a very expensive life. So when you get someone who starts to get mild cognitive impairment at age 50, they start to have signs of disease, they have things that impact their ability to work and do things and be productive at age 50, and they're going to live to be 100. This next 50 years of life could be a life of suffering. So these are the different concepts when we look at longevity and morbidity. And ultimately, the goal is to reduce morbidity and improve longevity. These are just some different terms. When you look at anti-aging and longevity medicine or wellness medicine, centenarian is really the focus, trying to get to age 100 and above. And if you look at different changes in life expectancy throughout history, like you can see in this black line, which is the life expectancy 50,000 years ago. I mean, basically, you look at most people are not getting really past age 30. That's really the drop of their peak, and they just start to die off. So if they get to 30, that's a pretty good life. And then you can see at different times our lifespan changes, and then you can see our current state, which is pink, and you can see right away there isn't this rapid decline, because in the first 10 years of life, medicine has figured out a way for survival of births, so we don't have early births, deaths anymore. And then you can see this lifespan expanding And then you can see that's going all the way up to like 90 to 100. These are realistic, but the goal is, even though we're going to try to get to 100, is to really have it expand more and have less morbidity over time. Now, if you look at the life expectancy from 1951 to now, let's say 2011, and what is projected to be in 2031, you can see we're starting to go from where 90 was amazing and getting to 100, where 100 is going to be kind of the new standard. And that really is where things are right now. Now, researchers have studied blood markers and made some predictive models, and the conclusion is that human potential lifespan prediction is based on known biology is 120, 150 years. So they're saying we physiologically could live to 120 to 150 years. And that's realistic for our organism to do, like our species. And look at other animals, you can see, like a mouse is not going to live past 5 years, right? And moles and dragonflies and worms, these are all used in longevity studies because they can be studied over their lifespan. Box turtle, 120 years, right? Grand tortoise, 150 years. So humans are in that 90-year age, 90 to 100 is what we're expecting. And current estimates show that some demographic forecasts suggest that babies born since the year 2000 will survive to their 100th birthday. Now the question is, are they going to survive without suffering, without morbidity? But lifespan is extending. So a lot of this is just to better food supply worldwide, better hospital care, better emergency care, drop in birth deaths over a period of time. Now, if you look at the oldest living person, the oldest documented living person, there's lots of people that theoretically have aged at a certain period, like gurus in India that are 150 years old, but they're not documented. Okay, the actual documented case where people go, here's your record, here's your birth certificate, here's pictures, here's everything, here's interviews. This is actually your age. Was Jean Calment. She was 122 years and 164 years old. And she drank, and she smoked, and she ate chocolate all the time. And I will tell you, the immediate response was, well, she just had good genes. Well, not really. And genes can be a part of it, but as we go into the research, you'll see genes play a very small role. Environment and how you express those genes is really more than anything. So let's look through her average day. Now, she requested to be woken at 6:45 a.m. and start a day with long prayer at her window. Fantastic. She seated in an armchair and did gymnastics wearing her stereo headset. She washed herself and dressed herself unassisted. She enjoyed braised beef and had dessert with every meal. She made herself daily fruit salads with banana and oranges. She enjoyed chocolate, sometimes indulging in 2.2 pounds per week. After the meal, she smoked a cigarette, drank a small amount of port wine. In the afternoon, she would take a nap for 2 hours in her armchair, then visit her neighbors, and then in the care home, and then telling about the news she had heard on the radio. And then at nightfall, she would dine quickly, return to her room, listen to music, smoke a last cigarette, and then go to bed at 10. So this is a daily routine. Now, if you look at this, you go, okay, wow, she's functioning. So listen, she still has motivation. She still has a sense of purpose. She still has social interaction. She still has friends. She can still taste her food. She enjoys her beef. She enjoys her chocolate, right? People get older and they can't smell and taste anymore. They get sarcopenia and their muscle wasting takes place. She's still working out. She's still listening to music. She's still engaging her brain. She's still physically active. And these are all the key things that are involved here. You're going to find very little research that supports if you just stop drinking all alcohol and do all bad things and just eat organic food, you're going to live forever. That's not how it works, okay? They have some role, but the bigger roles are things like sense of purpose, physical activity, doing things that impact resiliency. It's not just like cutting everything out. That's not how people live longer. People live longer by engaging and interacting and developing their resiliency over time. Now, when you look at her, by the way, you would go, okay, if I was doing this at 110, that's not a bad life. Versus someone who's 80 and They're on an oxygen machine, breathing that every day, going around on a little scooter because they can't walk anymore and they're in pain all the time. And then all they're doing all day is taking their medication. That would be a terrible life, even though, they're good, they could be younger. So the goal is to have less morbidity as you get older, right? That's the ideal scenario. And that's the key thing with centenarians. The ones that do typically are functioning as they get older. So if you look at the research worldwide, centenarians are becoming much, much more common, much more prevalent. So as time goes on, even now, we have a record-breaking number of centenarians throughout the world, and they are improving. And indeed, in the 90s, centenarians in Europe occurred at a prevalence rate of 1 per 10,000. In 2019, the prevalence rate is around 1 per 500. And then this leads into the issue that we actually have also with this paper that was published, Living Too Long. Okay, human life expectancy has been increasing at a rapid rate. Better health care and hygiene, healthier lifestyles, sufficient food, improved medical care, and reduced child mortality mean that we can now expect to live much longer than our ancestors just a few generations ago. However, this dramatic increase in life expectancy did not come with proportional increase in quality of life for the elderly. Generally, increased life expectancy has the increased risk of disease, disability, dementia, and advanced aging prior to death. So now we're getting a scenario that we're facing as a generation where parents are now developing dementia, they need family care, and then a person's retirement and their entire focus in their later adult life is to take care of their aging parents for 10, 20, 30 years because they're living longer because of better medical care, they're not dying, but their quality of life is not good. They also go on to say that life expectancy is currently increasing more rapidly than healthy life expectancy. Average number of years lived in good health. So that morbidity, average number of years lived in poor health is slowly expanding. And that's the key problem. So people are living longer, but suffering from chronic disease. Now, worldwide life expectancy is now up to an average age of 73 years, 6 years longer than it was in 2000. But chronic, in some cases, preventable diseases is taking a bigger hit than it was 20 years ago. So within nearly 4 in 5 older adults will be living with multiple medical conditions. And that's really what we're facing. So we also have to be conscious of this as practitioners, because when your practice starts shifting into just the aging population all the time, there's a point you may not be able to have things work that would work for other patients. So when you get to someone who's got immune senescence and severe inflammation, your protocol that may have worked if they were 40 may not work when they're 75 or 60, when they have severe inflammation and severe aging processes taking place. That does happen. There isn't, reversing aging to that significant degree is not likely, right? So there's some markers of aging that could be reversed or slowed down to some degree, but it's not permanent. It still continues progressing forward. So you kind of halt it, maybe make some changes, but then it keeps progressing over time. So it's a progressive disease. Aging is a progressive disease. So you want to be as functional as possible, but you want to know what you're dealing with when you see a new patient. So I don't know about you, but whenever I see a new patient, I'm always asking my question, okay, what's the potential for recovery? Because a lot of times their diagnosis is pretty straightforward. Like, you have diabetes. All right, that would explain every single symptom you have. What have you done for it? And you see someone who's done everything for it and is now completely off sugar, is exercising 2 times a day, is doing everything right, and they still have diabetes and they're 75. It's a different scenario. Okay, so those are parts of aging pathophysiology. Now, we may want to incorporate things to change your changing genes expressions to see if we can make a change with them, but we have to go into that understanding what's happening. Or if we get a person who's not responding, we may want to go deeper into the whole neuroscience field and see if there's issues that we need to look at. Now, when you look at people with good health and disability over their lifespan, you can see that for most people, 35 to 49 is where they start to break down. Right? And I would guess if you're practicing functional medicine, your age group is starting at that age. That's your youngest group. 35 to 49 is your average. You're not probably seeing many 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds. You may be if you're working with infertility or things like that, but other than that, this is where we're staying. And then you see with people, as they get older, their perceptual speed, their verbal memory, their numeric ability, their cognitive abilities, they start to go down sharpest around age 50. So that's when these expressions of these aging phenomena are taking place. Now, when you look at here birth and morbidity, death, you want to really, one goal is, again, this life extension. So you can see morbidity is here, with they're extending their life. But ultimately, you want compression of morbidity with the extended lifespan. You want to make sure a person's not suffering from disease. That's the ideal scenario. So here you can see healthy lifespan, healthy aging, and then there's disease, but down here's the optimal scenario. Lots of healthy aging all the way throughout their life, and then the last parts of their life where they may experience some of these patterns and symptoms. And then the key thing is people will lose function before they get frailty, before they get disease. And this is always where functional medicine shines, where people don't have disease, but they have fatigue. They don't have major depressive disorder, but they have some episodes of depression and motivation. They, don't have full-blown anaphylaxis allergies, but they are reacting to foods and environment around them. These are changes in function. So this is where functional medicine always shine. Conventional medicine has always been focused on disease, but on this whole process to getting through loss of function and disease, we start to have these hallmarks of aging taking place. Mitochondrial dysfunctions, telomere attrition, epigenetic modifications, dysregulated energy sensing pathways, and we'll go into those as well. Okay. So when you look at this paradigm here of aging, decreasing function, and functional disease pyramids, the geroscience model is these underlying cellular mechanisms are really the issue. Aging itself is a disease, and if you can treat and modulate, decrease things like oxidative stress, improve mitochondrial biogenesis, improve autophagy, if you can do clinical strategies like that, then you can slow down the process of morbidity and extend longevity, right? And various factors combined with your gene, like where you live, your exposure to different pathogens, your social networks, that then combine with your genes to then have these effects. But genes alone are not the only cause, right? And then as people start to look at this geroscience field, it's really shifting these mechanisms out of the way. And I could say we do some of these in functional medicine, but not all the time. And we definitely don't really think about them as well as we should. Now, the other thing you have to understand about longevity is that life expectancy decreases with each additional chronic condition, okay? So in this study, they looked at age of 67. They found a 67-year-old with no chronic conditions will live an average of 22.6 additional years. A chronic condition would be like chronic asthma, COPD, diabetes, right? If they don't have any chronic conditions, then someone who does, they'll live at least 22.6 years. More than likely, they'll probably get to be in the centenarian age group. A 67-year-old individual with 5 chronic conditions, right? Sleep apnea, high blood pressure, diabetes, you go in, easy to get 5. And less than 10 chronic conditions will live 7.7 fewer years and 17.6 fewer years respectively. And you can take a look at this diagram here. You can see, like, over time, what's actually happening is the more conditions a person has, this is looking at a 67-year-old, with over time, their life expectancy is going down, right? And I also want to talk to you about how does this get managed in healthcare. So first of all, in healthcare, each condition is treated by itself. Single disease, single drug set, single disease, single symptom, single medication. And then this leads into polypharmacy. And one of the most predictive factors that you're going to die early is if you're on polypharmacy, if you're on multiple medications. And not only that, they found that polypharmacy, being on multiple drugs, even if they're not related to cognitive decline, lead to cognitive decline. So you're more likely to have dementia and cognitive impairment the more medications you're on, even if the diseases are not directly related to, and those things are adjusted for it compared to those that don't. So, what we have a model is we have avoided people dying early during birth. People can live longer with different kind of therapeutics, but people are suffering, and then people are getting more and more conditions over a period of time. Now, I don't know about you, but in your practice, but if I see a patient that has multiple medications on them, I just don't work with them. my model cannot work. Once I see that they're on like 6 to 8 different drugs, I just say, you're in a different complete model than that I work with. And that's it. What I'm learning to do with my career as I'm getting older, and I only have limited time for patients, and as a practitioner, our sense of purpose is to help people, and that's a huge part of our well-being as well. So if you're seeing patients are going to fail all the time back to back, you're not going to want to do what you want to practice anymore. Your sense of purpose is not being fulfilled. So it's really important to know what kind of patients will respond. So when you see someone who's really getting to the point where they've lost their aging physiology and they're really going into immunosenescence and severe inflammation, if you continue to work with those patients and they don't respond, there's a point where you're not going to want to do this anymore. So you've got to start thinking about, if you haven't already, especially if you start to have limited times where you can see new patients, which patient population will respond the best? So the ones that have significant expressions of geroscience, where they have inflammation and severe mitochondrial impairment and epigenetic changes and all the things we get into, they're going to be probably still very easy to diagnose and figure out what's going on with them, but they may not respond to care. And you got to be careful how many of those you bring on. Now, of course, some of them will respond to care, and some of them will be grateful, and you will have a sense of purpose fulfilled helping them. But be aware that once patients start to go on polypharmacy, and when they start to get older and older, your ability to make a difference for them goes down. And the key thing to remember as a practitioner, because practitioners tend to beat themselves up all the time, is you're not the only variable. Right? Your diagnostic abilities and your ability to implement a treatment plan is not the only variable. There's lots of other variables that are involved behind that. Okay, now let's get back to the course. So when you look at this chart, this is really important to remember. And then, what are the most common causes of death worldwide? What do people die from? Well, worldwide, this is the list. Cardiovascular disease, way up there. Cancer, way up there. And it's the same. Doesn't matter if we look at Europe and Central Asia, we look at the US. So cardiovascular disease and cancer far exceed everything else. And they're pretty similar all across the world at this time. Now, the interesting thing is cardiovascular disease and cancer, they both are silent until they get really progressed. If you identify cardiovascular disease early, there's a big chance you can change everything. If you identify cancer early, big chance you can change anything. But they're silent. They're silent diseases, right? The silent killers. So you have to have early diagnostic tools to help you find those. We're going to go over that when we get into the wellness section of the course, how to identify early disease. And you're not going to do it with a standard physical exam. So if you look at these different conditions over a period of time, as people develop different conditions, life expectancy goes down. These are the most common causes of death in the US and Europe. Okay. How effective is the standard analytic workup to find early stages of these conditions? Or early stages of these conditions, I want to say it's terrible. Progressed stages, not so hard, not so bad, okay? How effective are you in identifying early stages of the conditions in your practice? Do you identify early stages of these conditions in your own practice? What about for yourself? What about for your loved ones? What about for your family, right? Those are important things. Now, when people have looked at the actual outcomes of a traditional analytic physical exam with people that don't have any symptoms, they find it's not really effective at all. It's not that useful. So this is a paper that was published, Periodic Preventive Health Visits, a more appropriate approach to delivering preventive strategies. And they go on to say, what we're doing in a physical exam as a medical community has to really be questioned. We're not really looking at early detection diseases. We're not doing the best screening tests. We're doing tests that will find disease in the late stages, not in the early stages. And that whole model needs to change, right? And that's important because when we look at health span and lifespan, there's two parts to it. One is avoid disease development, identify these things as early as possible, modulate the expression of them. And the other part is reduce aging pathophysiology, all the different hallmarks of aging. Make sure genes aren't being damaged, make sure you're doing things to repair genes, make sure mitochondrial functioning ideally, make sure you do things to activate autophagy. Those are all the clinical things that we definitely want to make sure that we're aware of. Now, as we go through this introduction part, there's some key principles of aging I want to cover with you, okay? So let's talk about this whole field of longevity research, where it started, where it is right now, what are the limitations of it, and so forth. So first of all, you should know it's mostly done in yeast, worm, and flies. Okay? It's not done in humans. Most human longevity studies are limited at this point. They're obviously working on them, but they have, and part of this is just because of limitations of time. Researchers have to look at things of a human lifespan and the lifespan of a researcher, right? So a major area of research has been things like caloric restriction, intermittent fasting, like fast mimicking diets, time restriction eating. So here you can see when you look at caloric restriction, it's first done in yeast, then worm, then fly, then fish. Well, actually not in fish, then mouse, then rat, then monkey, but nothing in humans. We don't have any humans, right? Intermittent fasting. All the different animals, this extends longevity, but has been shown extended in humans. Like no studies really have shown that. Fast mimicking diets, again, yeast. The fast mimicking diet's really popular. A lot of people are selling these things online with these box kits, and I believe that the information is translatable to humans, but just realize it hasn't been done, right? Because how are you going to do that? You're going to have someone do a fast mimicking diet for, let's say, 10 days, 12 days, and then you're going to see if they live longer, and you're going to follow them for how many periods of time. So they have to use species that are limited. So here's the thing. It's not to say that the research is not valid. The research is valid, and some study designs and certain study questions, you have to have, is there able to transfer, or translate that message into different species? And I think it's for sure translatable. And people that practice longevity medicine and scientists also believe so, because they're seeing, for sure if someone has too many calories or less calories, there's a different impact on their function, their health, and markers for risk than if they were on a caloric restricted diet, for example. Now, that's just a timeline of discoveries in the aging field. So, again, you're going to see like rats, mice, worms were the big major breakthroughs. And as we get into humans, they're starting some human trials. There's some data banks. You'll see some longevity studies done, like the Nurses Health Study, prospective studies over a period of time to make some associations. And it's really a field of research that's really lots of associations, very little clinical trials. Very limited human studies, but still the information is somewhat translatable. And so this is important for you because, you always get people that are skeptical. And if you go, hey, I want to do a 3-day fast, can you give me any human clinical trial studies that shows that it actually extended lifespan? Your answer is no. They've never done those studies. And guess what? They probably never will. There's a point you can't do entire lifespan studies with some kind of intervention. And the cost, the amount of people you would need, because of statistical significance, it's just not feasible, right? So there's just study questions we cannot incorporate. So we have to use the best of what we can. We can look at risk factors, we can look at predictive markers over short periods of time to see if they can impact some of these expressions of risk, but it is what it is. Now, another key concept is to understand the concept of biological age versus chronological age, right? So chronological age, the amount of time that has passed from a birth to a given date. So how old you are. Biological age is the physiological state of your function and health compared to other age groups. And they're not the same. So you could have someone, who's 40, but they look like they're 60. You can have someone who's 40 that looks like they're 20 and not only look, but function as if they're younger or older. So the ability to function at different ages is a key factor. Now, one part of research is we should really start looking at biological age instead of chronological age to see if different outcomes are working. Because if someone is aging, someone's 50, but they have the biological age of being 75, then they may have a different outcome to different treatments, right? So we tend to use age as the only variable. Now, there's different ways to measure biological age. One of them is to measure telomeres. So if you remember telomeres on your chromosomes at the very end, you have these telomeres, and these telomeres are actually shortening after different cell divisions. And one of the ways that people can measure someone's age is to look at their telomere length. So as you get older, you have more chromosome cell division over a period of time, and then the telomere lengths get shorter, right? And then telomerase maintains the length of these telomeres even as cell division is happening. So you'll see a lot of research we'll talk about where things can impact telomerase, like exercise, like physical exercise. The reason it has an anti-aging effect, it activates telomerase, which allows these telomeres to not shorten, or they call it telomere attrition over a period of time. Now, if you measure telomeres, and telomeres can be measured in different cells, the most common cell that they use are peripheral blood, white blood cells, peripheral blood leukocytes. If you look at these on a lifespan of a population, you can see that they're different. So you can see telomere length of a 100-year-old is around 5. And this is leukocyte LTL, you see that all the time. That refers to leukocyte telomere length. But if you look at someone who's 30, they're up in the 8 scenario. So the younger they are, they're on the right-hand side, and as they get older, they go left, and you can see the telomere lengths are shortening. So just age alone is going to impact telomere length. And then they're correlating telomere length in different studies with organ age, because you could have a different biological age overall, but you could have a different biological age of your heart, you can have a different biological age of your immune system. And as time goes on, researchers are identifying those relationships, and now they're looking at correlations between things like biological age and chronological age and cognitive function and your telomere length, and they're finding really good associations. So longevity medicine always will be a field of association studies and risk and so forth, but one of the things that can be done is to measure telomeres. And you can measure your telomeres of your patients. You can measure your own telomeres and see where you're at. You get a general idea of your biological age. So here's like a telomere report. This is the average age of this patient's telomeres, 7.64. You can see they're 34 years old, and their percentile relative to the patient age and that population, they're in the 38th percentile. So that's not that great. So if you look at their telomere length 7.634, age 35, if you kind of look at this study here, age like 35, then the blue, it should be much higher, So that's one way you can look at biological age. And this is, so if you look at these telomere shortening patterns, you can see we have 15,000 base pairs right when we're born. And then as we age, midlife, you get to like 7,000. And then as you get older and older, your numbers go down. So you can look at these and see if they make a difference. Now, the question I always ask is, can you reverse your telomere lengths? Can you change it? And the real answer is, and I'll show you studies on this, there's things that turn on telomerase, which can help lengthen them, but all they do is they slow down the continued loss of them. So there's an amount of like DNA damage and environmental effects you have in your telomeres that you may not really make a difference for them. And then people will go, no, I heard someone say you can actually change your telomeres. No, they're reading information incorrectly. They're reading telomerase activity changed with something like exercise or taking a flavonoid. Doesn't mean their actual telomere length was changed. There's a big difference, okay? And this is important because when you have expression of aging, as your telomere length starts to become shorter and shorter, and you have less cell division over time, you become less deficient overall. Your cell divisions go down, your epigenetic expressions go down, you become less efficient to attain homeostasis, which means you're more likely to have chronic disease, most likely to develop cancer cells, most likely to not be able to recover from cancer cell development, and so forth. So telomere length is a tool that's used to look at biological age. Now, there's also the frailty index you might see used in some studies, the number of health deficits a person has present, and the number of health deficits that are measured. They do this calculation. We're not too concerned about that. And then there's new technology that's being used in research circles. There's a lot of potential, like DNA methylation tests used to look at aging and look at the epigenetic clock. I think that's going to be a very important future marker to look at biological age. It's just not commercially available for us to use in practice on a clinical setting right now. But we can measure telomeres, but it just gives you some general idea of where they are. And ultimately, once you have one telomere length, clinically, you're just trying to make sure it doesn't get worse and slows down over a period of time. So it's not like one of those things where they have a telomere length that's maybe not in the best percentile for their age, and you do your thing, and then you expect to see those things grow, and now you're reversed aging. Like, that will not happen. Okay? So be aware of that. And if you try to make that happen, all you're going to do is have your patient upset with you, and you're going to end up seeing that it's a model that's not realistic. So you can measure telomere length to get a general idea of what their biological age is compared to people their age, compared to their chronological age. And then from that point on, it's not used as an ongoing intervention to see if it can get longer. You're just trying to make sure it's not getting worse over time that's faster. So maybe as they get older, they are not worse in their age population percentage compared to other people their age. So that's something you can do over a period of time. Okay, then you have genetics of aging, all right? So look at the genes. We got these genes, we got these chromosomes, and then these chromosomes and genes express. We have 23 chromosomes, we have the genome, and really when we look at genetics is involved with our genes. We have certain mutations in our genes, some variations or uniqueness in our genes that are normal, that makes us who we are. Some genetic mutations will mean that we have a stronger immune system. Some genetic mutations mean some people never will get HIV. Some genetic mutations will allow us to be more tolerant to certain toxic chemicals. Some genetic mutations will make us more at risk for certain toxic chemical exposures. So all these different genetic differences we have called single nucleotide polymorphisms, right? And then we have the expression of these genes as it combines with the environment being nutrition, drugs, pathogens, toxins, relationships, movement, exercise, everything we do. And then we have epigenetic response, and phenotype is who you are, right? So this is the phenotype. And the question is, are these people that are living to be 100 years old, these people that are dying of disease, or they just have really great genes? And researchers have really looked at this, and here's really what they found. And this was a paper that was published. It was called Review and Meta-Analysis of Genetic Polymorphisms Associated with Exceptional Human Longevity. Conclusion: in general, the observed modest effect size of significant variance suggests many genes of small influence play a role in exceptional longevity, which is consistent with results of other polygenic traits. Our results also suggest that genes related to cardiovascular health may be implicated in exceptional longevity. So there isn't like the one gene you have and you live longer. I know the APOE4 gene is really, really popular. APOE4 gene, especially if you have the 4/4 genotype, you have major risk for things like dementia. But that alone is not, there isn't a strong gene like that just for your longevity. Now, genes like APOE4 and other cardiovascular genes do have some role to play, but it's like the combination of multiple genes and then things that impact them that have an impact. So each gene has a certain expression and a potential for longevity. So APE2, 2, 3, or 4, different variants may have some expression and some small influence of overall longevity, and other things all add up. So it's not like you're good if you have this one gene. Like there isn't this person has I can smoke his cigar 3 times a day gene, live forever. They don't have that. It doesn't exist. It's a combination of all these small genes that all kind of work together, okay? Non-genetic factors predict lifestyle clearly affect the development of age-related diseases and affect health and lifespan in the general population. So it really is one of those things that you don't just get the lottery and win. Now, there definitely are some people that do have reduced risk because, especially cardiovascular risk factors and the key ones with longevity, that have the better hand. But ultimately, no one gets the winning hand. They all have a hand that they have to work with, right? Okay. And then here's another paper that was titled, How Important Are Genes to Achieve Longevity? It is thought for the first 8 decades of life, a correct lifestyle is a stronger determinant of health and lifespan than genetics. Genetics that appear to play a progressively important role in keeping individuals healthy and live as they age into the 80s and beyond. For centenarians, it reaches up to 30% for women and 48% for men. However, in general, the effect size weren't were not large, suggesting that many genes of small effect play a role, as indeed in all multifactorial traits. So there's some overlap with some centenarians that have like a better hand for certain genes, especially cardiovascular genes, but ultimately genes alone are not enough. Now, when you look at genetics and you start getting into the field of longevity, you're going to hear these genes all the time. mTOR, sirtuins, and the insulin-like growth factor, or the IS2 pathway, and you're also going to hear about AMPK, okay? Now, ultimately, you want to decrease mTOR, increase sirtuins, decrease IS2, and increase AMPK. That's like the goal of everything you hear about. And in longevity medicine, these were the genes that were first identified with caloric restriction. So they found when people went into, or animals, I should say, not people, like worms and flies and mice, they went into caloric restrictions, they were able to see these different genes change their expressions. And then later on, they were able to see that if mTOR expression goes down, for example, there's less inflammation, there's less abnormal protein translation responses, autophagy to cleaning up the debris, the garbaging cells is improved, stem cell function goes up, ribosomal biogenesis changes. So this dampening this mTOR pathway is important. And then later on, they found that this anti-cancer drug, rapamycin, suppressed this mTOR pathway. And they're doing with mice, and mice usually live 30 months. And they found, wow, some of these mice are now living, instead of like 30 months, they're living over 3 years when they're in this clinical trial taking this cancer drug. And then they start to realize, okay, is this impacting genes somehow? And then this gene, TOR, became the target of rapamycin. That's why it's called TOR. Because they first discovered the drug had an effect, then they went to see what is that drug impacting. They found it was impacting this gene. They named it mTOR, target for rapamycin. And rapamycin being an immunosuppressive drug, the drug that's used with organ transplants, and it has these effects. And there's some people that are in the longevity medicine world that should believe everyone should take it on an ongoing basis. It's hard to say. They haven't done a clinical trial. We don't know what the long-term effects of someone doing that are, but you'll hear that in the longevity world. And then sirtuins were initially found in worms, and increased expression of sirtuins just basically change all the hallmarks of aging that we want. And then IIS is insulin-driven pathway, where like high caloric intake really can impact cancer development and cause inflammation throughout the body. You want that suppressed as much as possible. And basically, the main efforts and studies have initially been done with longevity medicine in animals with caloric restriction. And they found caloric restriction does exactly this. It changes mTOR, increases sirtuins, and dampens this IIS pathway. And now they've found a few other drugs we'll talk about that have done these things, the nutraceuticals that can impact these pathways, and those are the things we want to talk about when we talk about changing geroscience expression. The AMPK pathway, just think of it as an energy pathway. It's used to help activate energy pathways, and the sirtuin pathways make a difference there on the AMPK expressions. And AMPK suppresses mTOR, which is what you want, so these genes have expressions of activating and inhibiting each other as well. This AMPK expression, this AMPK signaling is activated by things like exercise and hormones and phytochemicals. Metformin has been shown to really activate this AMPK. That's why metformin is one of the top medications people like to use in the anti-aging, or I should say longevity medicine world. But these are the expressions of AMPK. So you're going to hear these genes all the time as we go over different research papers. And basically what they're doing is they're promoting autophagy, they're reducing inflammation, they're making mitochondria more efficient, they're making metabolism more effective. So those are the key things. And these genes are primarily impacted by lifestyle. Exercise, movement, caloric intake, and certain medications and nutraceuticals. Now, where they actually come over a period of time really increase human lifespan is a different story, but they certainly have been shown to do it in animal models. Okay, so then we get into the drugs that have shown to impact these genes. So rapamycin, we already talked about. Resveratrol has been shown to impact the sirtuin pathways. Senolytics, these are compounds that get rid of the so-called garbage cells. When cells become dysfunctional, become senescent cells. And then they become senescent cells that produce these inflammatory mediators. And then there's nutraceuticals that have been shown and drugs shown to help block that. NR is just basically riboside nicotinamide, which is like a B supplement, different variation of B supplement that's been shown to activate some sirtuin genes. Metformin activates the AMPK pathway. Spermidine has also been shown to impact these gene expression pathways. And this is a paper in your course materials that really goes over all the different medications and nutraceuticals that have been shown to impact these genes. But the main ones are metformin. So you're going to see this all the time. And metformin, they were, obviously is initially used as a diabetic drug because it impacts insulin signaling. But they found that in addition to impacting insulin signaling, it also impacts the IGF-1 receptor, turns on AMPK pathways, and activates sirtuins pathways, and those are all the things that impact health span and longevity. And when they give metformin to animals unrelated to diabetes, it does increase lifespan. Okay. Now, berberine has been shown to have similar properties to metformin, so there's potential for berberine to have the similar effects, but it hasn't been studied yet. Rapamycin, you can see, has impacts on these mTOR pathways we talked about. Also impacts the IGF-1 receptor. Ultimately, the goal is to promote autophagy, get rid of that garbage, stabilize DNA, help with, intercellular communication. Resveratrol pops up everywhere. No matter what's, when you look at all the different diseases and conditions, resveratrol is everywhere. Curcumin is everywhere. Okay, these are resveratrol and curcumin are two most well-published flavonoids, nutraceuticals that impacts disease at all levels. I don't know about you, but I take resveratrol and curcuminoids every day, and I will forever. Because paper after paper after paper shows these effects. And you're not going to get the resveratrol you need from drinking red wine. The resveratrol clinical effect is going to be with hundreds and hundreds of milligrams, not what you're going to get with red wine. Okay, but red wine saves you and all that. Those have actually been shown to really be more when they adjust for different variables. Drinking wine helps with longevity is more because of the social impact. They actually follow the people that live longer drinking wine. They're the ones that take a break and hang out with some friends and enjoy a glass of wine. And if they didn't have that social thing and just drink wine, they wouldn't have the same benefits. And for sure, if you drink a lot of wine, you have too much alcohol, we'll get into that research, you're going to age faster, right? So there's a protective effect with nutraceuticals that you're not going to get with wine, all right? Okay, and then you have these senolytic therapies. So these, as the cells become dysfunctional, they become senescent cells and they don't grow through cell division anymore. This ends up being what's called the so-called garbage. They call it GARBA aging pathways. And then these senescent cells get turned on to SASP cells. And these are senescent cells that are now releasing inflammatory mediators, right? And these senescent cells that turn into SASP cells or senescence-associated secretory phenotypes, meaning they're secreting inflammatory mediators to cause inflammation all throughout the body. It's part of the inflammaging. So curcumin, even resveratrol, different flavonoids can block some of these inflammatory expressions of the garbage age celling, but really what gets rid of these senescent cells is things that promote autophagy. Okay, but as long as we have these senescent cells, we have these different changes. So some drugs, you can see the list here, have been shown to impact these senescent cells. And ultimately, if you kind of take a look at, longevity and genes, it's basically dietary restriction has been shown to impact these aging genes. And then rapamycin, metformin, resveratrol are the main drugs that have been popularized because of animal research that's shown to impact them. Okay, now let's move on to hormesis and drugs that impacts the hormesis. So when you look at the lifestyle and dietary clinical interventions, you're really looking at two main things. One is the lifestyle or diet intervention or drug intervention, whatever's being done, is directly activating these longevity genes, or they're activating genes that indirectly prevent pathophysiology of aging. And that would be things that impact mitochondrial homeostasis, DNA protection, cellular signaling, and cell responsiveness. And this pathway to turn on these genes that prevent pathophysiology of aging is really things that impact the hormetic response. Things that make you stronger but don't kill you. That level of activating a system but not damaging a system, right? So this is called hormesis. So hormesis is a huge concept in longevity medicine. And then specific hormesis-inducing interventions during development would allow to achieve optimal balance between activation and repression of various genes, thus prevent age-related degenerative diseases and slowing of aging. So here you can see like this shape, this diagram here where there's a hormetic level. So for example, you can look at exercise over here. So if someone exercises, they have benefit, but there's a point where the exercise can start to cause harm, and they can get injured and have overtraining, and that's that hormetic benefit, right? So this is the key thing. You really want to activate your longevity pathways by promoting as much hormesis, but without doing harm. So let me give you a scenario here. So let's say you have a person, and they have excessive caloric intake every day. They have a sedentary lifestyle. They have no cognitive stimulation, and they're in a sterile environment. Compared to someone who has limited caloric intake, has an athletic lifestyle, has intellectual challenges, and has ongoing environmental microbe exposure. What do you think is going to happen with their gene expressions? Well, everything down here is activating hormesis, right? They're activating these pathways here. So things like a little bit of free radical exposure, a little bit of caloric restriction, some microbiome pathogen challenges, emotional challenges, physical challenges, a little bit of toxin challenges, thermal changes. They're not harmful to you, but activate your antioxidant pathways. They activate your biotransformation pathways. They impact your sirtuins, your AMPK pathways. They impact your mitochondrial biogenesis pathways, promote autophagy. They will help you build physiological resilience. So if you take a look at these two situations, the first one is like, how do you think these people are going to age? The one on the top that has no stress in their life. Just think of hormesis as a stressor. They're not hungry. They're not working out. They don't have any cognitive stimulation. They're just on the computer all day watching YouTube videos or whatever they do, right? Or on Netflix watching one show after another. And then they're always in a sterile environment. They don't get out. They're out in nature. They don't do anything, right? They're going to absolutely age faster. They're not going to turn on their hormetic pathways, okay? And if they're a child, they're not going to develop very well. There's someone who's like, hey, I'm not going to eat breakfast. I'm going to go right into the gym. I'm going to work out. I'm going to try to learn a new language. I'm going to get out there in nature and do things. They're changing their gene expressions. It really is that simple. When you look at fundamentally, when you go down to the mechanism of aging and building resiliency, that's the key thing, is you activate these hormesis pathways. You activate these hormesis pathways, you slow down aging, right? And this is where things like the things that make you live longer are the things that make you have a stress and suffer. Exercise. You work out. Oh, I can't work out anymore. This sucks. You keep pushing. Lifting weights. Muscles burn. You push a little bit more. Caloric restriction. You're hungry. Okay, that's okay. Cognitive challenge. Wow, I'm having a really hard time learning this. I got to sit down and really figure this out. Those are all the things that are going to increase longevity. Okay? That's the bottom line. When we start looking at interventions and impact these pathways, and this is why people like to do cold plunges. This is why people like to go into saunas. This is why people exercise and run. And we'll go into the research. But all these things also can get to the point where a person has adverse reactions. And when a person has loss of resiliency, what they've actually lost is their threshold for when the stimulus exceeds their level of what's causing damage, right? So that's another thing we're going to talk about. Now, when you look at centenarians, they're different. And one of the key ways they're different is how their immune system functions. So let's talk about what happens with normal aging and how centenarians are a little bit different. So here you can see the innate and the adaptive immune system, right? So in normal conditions, the innate immune system, enhanced antigen presenting cells come in, there's increased inflammation, that's a normal response, that protects you from dying from an infection, it's a normal inflammatory response. Then the adaptive immune system kicks in. Over a period of time, there's some cellular DNA damage, there's some telomere shortening, there's inefficient T and B cells, there's immune senescence, dysregulated immune response, loss of inflammation, and resilience. Could be any kind of trigger for the immune system. Okay, could be injured muscle cells, could be antigen, pathogen, whatever the case scenario is. What's different with centenarians, when you look at the research, is they have the same healthy, adaptive, innate immune system. They can fight pathogens and antigens. They can respond against them. That's why they usually don't die of cancer and infections throughout their lifespan. But their adaptive immune response does a few things that are totally different, and it's different than normal people. One of them is the regulatory T cells and regulatory B cells are highly functioning. And as people get older, the regulatory T cells go down and regulatory B cells go down. And regulatory T cells and B cells modulate how responsive the immune response is. And there's a paradox with centenarians is they produce antibodies against all their tissues, but they don't have autoimmune disease. And these antibodies are now helping them clear their dead cells. So the key thing with centenarians is they have a very, very efficient clearing out these garbage cells, aging cells, these senescent cells, these unhealthy cells. They get rid of unhealthy mitochondria. That's what's really efficient with them. That's one of the things that allows them to not be as inflamed and have as many degenerative changes as they get older. Okay, now another key thing with centenarians, and probably the most important thing that studies keep continuing to show, is that they have better resilience. Okay, and this is a paper in your course materials, Centenarians, an excellent example of resilience for successful aging. Centenarians are remarkable not only because of their prolonged life, but also because they compress morbidity until the very last few months of their lives, thus being proposed as a model of successful extraordinary aging. From the medical viewpoint, centenarians do not escape the physiological decline or the age-related diseases or symptoms, but the rate of such process is slow enough to be counterbalanced by their increased intrinsic capacity to respond to minor stressors of daily life, or resilience. So resilience is the key thing. Like, this is how you know if you're aging, and this is how to avoid the negative expressions of aging over time. This is how do you keep your biological age healthy. Key concept. Our essential feature of centenary biology compared to those with reduced lifespan is improved physiological resilience. The term resilience is defined as the ability to bounce back after successful encounter to adversity in life. And this is also psychological. They found happens with centenarians. Like, bad things happen to everyone. Centenarians are like, okay, let's get through it. Let's move ahead. Whereas other people that show they don't have psychological resilience are like, oh, it's the end of the world. Oh, this is terrible. That's one of the main features study after study after study has shown. Psychological resiliency, stress resiliency, micro resiliency, blood sugar resiliency. These are the key features of centenarians, people who live longer, healthy aging, okay? Here's another paper. This was a Chinese longitudinal health longevity study, 16,566 subjects. In conclusion, they were looking at all the things, what makes people live longer, what are the key things in our population that are allowing individuals to reach the ages of 100 or more. And they put, in conclusion, the present study provides strong evidence to support the hypothesis after adjusting for various confounders, including current health, centenarians are significantly more resilient. That's it, more resilient than any other age group of the elderly population. And that better resilience contributes significantly to exceptional longevity, even at very advanced ages. Here's another paper. It's a good review paper. And it was titled Resilience in Successful Aging. Resilience is one of the pillars of a successful aging, has received increasing attention from the scientific community in recent years, and has become even more important past COVID-19 pandemic, where countries worldwide are trying to build individual communities and systemic resilience. And that's one of the key things that really explains the pandemic. People that had low immune resiliency were the ones that suffered more from the virus. And it's going to be the same for every pandemic that happens. And then another paper that was titled Decline in Biological Resilience as a Key Manifestation of Aging, Potential Mechanism of World Healthy Longevity. Decline in biological resilience is a key manifestation of aging. At the whole body level, it means that older person is able to recover after an adverse event less quickly and completely than she was able to do at a younger age. So one of the things we want to look at is physiological resiliency. When we look at physiological resiliency, you have immune, endocrine, stress, physical, emotional, toxicological. And if it's impaired, that's when disease development socially takes place. It's also where you have reduced lifespan. And if it's healthy, that's when you have increased health span, less morbidity, less disease development, improved longevity. And when you're looking at centenarians, when you get unhealthy aging, they don't have resilience, they get an illness, they die. Normal aging, there's aging that goes down over time. Centenarians, the resiliency stays up throughout their throughout their lifespan. So when you look at decreased function, really what that is loss of resiliency. And then from a geroscience point of view, the things that cause loss of resiliency are these variables: genomic instability, telomere attrition, epigenetic alterations, and so on. And we'll go over these in the next lecture and what these mechanisms are in detail. But as a clinician, how do you know how you're aging? How do you know how your patients are aging? And if they're aging poorly, that means they're less likely to respond to any kind of an intervention, whether it's to have their diet change their physiology, or have supplements change their physiology, or whatever that may be. So you got to be able to find resilience. So these are a list I made for the course of all the different types of resiliencies. And I also made a checklist for you. We're going to use it as we evaluate patients from a longevity perspective. So let's go through them. First of all, pathogen resiliency is the ability to coordinate an immune response against a pathogen, right? Immune resiliency, ability to maintain immune cells. So you have someone who's got really low white blood cells all the time, they've lost their immune resiliency. Microbiome resiliency, ability to change bacteria populations and postbiotics. Sometimes you see people, you do a GI panel, they never change their microbiome patterns. No matter how much dietary intervention and nutritional interventions you do, their microbiome does not respond. That's microbiome resiliency. You can definitely see that in your aging population. Stress response resiliency, ability to maintain physiological homeostasis under stress. So some people completely fall apart in stress, and some people can handle it. That's stress resiliency. Psychological resiliency, ability to maintain a positive mood in relationships. Again, some people can't handle some stress in their life. Some people totally break down. Psychological stress. Cognitive resiliency, ability to handle cognitive challenges, the cognitive endurance. Some people can't read, can't handle cognitive tasks. Some people need breaks all the time so they can absorb material. That's their cognitive resiliency. Thermal resiliency, ability to handle cold and hot temperatures. This can change over time. Now there's metabolic conditions that can impact all of these things, like thyroid disorders can impact resiliency for temperature. But that's it. If your resiliency goes down because of thyroid disorder, that's part of you aging faster. These are all part of normal physiology. Toxicological resiliency, ability to quench metabolize toxins. Dietary resiliency, the ability to tolerate proteins. So, like if you get a person that comes in and they have now every single food sensitivity, their microbiome panel isn't changing at all, their white blood cells are low, that's not changing, they've tried every single supplement, they tried every lifestyle change, that's functional medicine trying to address it, and it's not getting an effect. So the next step, which is really why we put this course together, is go further back, go into geroscience, try to really promote autophagy, really try to perform things that impact epigenetic, try to do things that impact DNA repair, and that's what we'll get into. So you want to look at these resiliencies: inflammatory resiliency, physical resiliency, blood sugar resiliency, sleep resiliency, and see where they are. Now for yourself, where are you with these? If they've gotten worse, you're aging poorly. You're aging faster. If they've gotten more inefficient over time and sooner, then you're aging really rapidly. So if someone says, like in the past year, my sleep resiliency has really changed. Like I have to have this amount of sleep or I won't function. It was never this bad. That's really bad. That's really bad. That's really accelerated aging. That's really rapid. Versus they say, over the past 5 years, I've noticed I've had to sleep longer. Right? That's different. And people are like, hey, I started doing this new exercise program. I took out these foods from my diet. I started just doing like a 12-hour or 14-hour intermittent fast, and now like I can sleep and function well with just like 7 hours of sleep. I used to need like 9. That means they're improving their resiliency for one of the variables, sleep. So take an example of these scenarios. Let's say you have someone who's unable to recover from exercise. They have brain fatigue. They have severe depression, anxiety with social events. They cannot function with less than 8 hours of sleep. What's their life expectancy? What's their morbidity? What's their longevity? It's different, right? So you can see they don't have physical resilience, they don't have cognitive resilience, they don't have psychological resilience, they don't have sleep resilience. That's not good. For someone who exercises every day, learns new language and loves traveling, loves to try new foods, sleeps 6 hours a night and feels recovered in the morning. 2 different people. These people are in a different age, completely different. And if you're looking at, let's say they both had leaky gut, this person, you're not going to get much change despite what you do. This person's going to respond really quickly. Okay, here's another scenario. 50-year-old, body and joint hurt all the time with no known cause, must take a nap after each meal, no sense of purpose in life. Compared to, loves to hike, mountain bike every week, feels connected to his community. Complete difference in how they age, the morbidity and longevity, right? So the question to ask is, how is your resiliency? Are you going to be a centenarian? How is your morbidity? So these are questions that are associated with loss of resiliency. So if you're unable to recover from viral infection, simply have chronic viruses that keep getting reactivated, that's loss of pathogen resiliency. Long COVID is a sign of loss of viral resiliency. Okay, unable to tolerate damp buildings or mold, that's like a loss of pathogen resiliency related to mold. Unable to restore gastrointestinal health after a parasite, that's pathogen resiliency. There's people that have parasites all over the gut, they have 0 symptoms, they have 0 markers of inflammation. They have really good microbiome resiliency. Some do not. Development of chronic bacterial infections, chronic sinuses, chronic bronchitis, chronic gastritis. Those are loss of pathogen resiliency, specifically bacterial. Chronic immune weakness and low white blood cells, immune resiliency. Unable to adjust to a new diet. Some people who travel, they have to bring their own food. If they try anything new, their microbiome is totally disrupted. They have severe bowel changes. They can't handle traveling. It's a loss of microbiome resiliency. Complete breakdown from stress response. Loss of stress resiliency. Unable to stay positive and develop social relationships. Loss of psychological resiliency. So now everything in life is terrible. Everything in life is bad. That's a really predictive marker of early death, by the way. Poor mental endurance and cognitive decline. That's cognitive resiliency. Unable to tolerate cold temperatures. Loss of thermal resiliency. Fatigue and illness when exposed to environmental chemicals. It's loss of chemical resiliency. So go through and check yourself. How many of these do you have right now? And when did it get worse? Is it getting worse? Intolerant to multiple food proteins, dietary protein intolerance. Systemic inflammation without obvious trigger. This is inflammatory resiliency. Exaggerated inflammatory immune response. So you're acting much more to the same trigger. That's loss of inflammatory resiliency. Unable to recover from exercise, physical exertion, loss of physical resiliency. Severe fatigue after meals, lots of blood sugar resiliency. And then here, unable to sleep 6 to 8 hours, loss of sleep resiliency. So, in a functional medicine model, we may go in there and go, oh, you can't get rid of this mold. Let's kill the mold. You need to kill all these anti-mold products and things like that. But maybe you have to just improve your immune resiliency. For someone who's got chronic multiple food intolerances, maybe it's not leaky gut. Maybe they just have lost their immune tolerance resiliency, their dietary protein resiliency. When we look at individuals have different degrees of resiliency. So they're not all the same. And here is variance in shapes and indicates different degrees of resiliency. So they have really good dietary protein resiliency. They're not developing lots of food sensitivities, but their psychological resiliency is not as great. They can't handle any negative, attacks against them, or if someone says anything negative against them, they totally fall apart and can't handle anything of that nature, for example. And their sleep resiliency is good. They can function even when they don't have the best sleep all the time. But the physical resiliency is not as good. They're having a hard time to recover. So these things all change as we age and go through it. The goal is, where are you with each one of these types of resiliency patterns? So we all have various degrees of resiliency. Here you can see a line. Anything below it is poor. Anything below it is poor. Anything above this line is exceptional. Good's like in between. And, some people have some things they're poor with and some things that they're good with. So ideally with normal aging, most things are good. You may have a few things that are bad, but most things are pretty good. So that's an example of normal aging. Then you can have someone who's just lost all the resiliency. That's for sure led it towards unhealthy aging and morbidity. And then you have centenarians. The resiliencies are all exceptional. Bad things happen in life, no big deal. We'll move on. Sleep, I need it, but I can function if I don't have it all the time. And the system is adapt to it. And the more acts of hormesis they do in their life, like cardiovascular fitness, things that increase muscle strength, things that impact the cognitive, synaptic plasticity, connectivity, the ability to deal with psychological changes, the more resiliency they build. The more resiliency they build, the more likely that they'll have greater longevity. Key concept. Our essential feature of sedentary biology compared to those with reduced lifespan is improved physiological resilience. So we're going to talk about resilience a lot. In a functional medicine model, we want to look at resilience and start to determine if that's impacting our patients' outcomes, or some of our patients not responding because of these factors. And if these are the factors, then we may want to go into this whole neuroscience field and start going, how do we really promote autophagy? How do we promote epigenetic expressions? How do we preserve DNA? How do we optimize mitochondrial biogenesis? And stop really thinking about the condition itself and really start thinking about the cellular pathway. So the concept of neuroscience is exactly that you have dysfunctional changes in pathways that then lead to expressions of disease. And then ultimately it's resilience. That's the key factor. We're going to really focus on these hallmarks of aging. The next lecture, we're going to go into this in great detail and explain each of these mechanisms, how they express clinically, what things you can see and can't see clinically with them, and how do you impact them by the time we get through with the course. So ultimately, when we look at aging, loss of function, and disease, functional medicine, we try to look at things that are dysfunctioning, like the microbiome's imbalanced, or they have leaky gut, or they have blood sugar responses abnormal, they have insulin resistance. And field of neuroscience is, they have those things happening because these things are becoming abnormal. So sometimes we want to go deeper and look at those mechanisms as well. And this is all the different hallmarks of aging that are involved with the aging process that we can clinically impact with various things. So as we get through the course, we're going to talk about what these mechanisms are. We're going to talk about how to identify when these things break down, which is loss of resiliency, and then how to do things to improve resiliency, and then how to develop personalized programs to be aggressive or non-aggressive at dealing with these issues. And then also we're going to talk about what kind of things that may impact you if you've lost some resiliency. How do you optimize your own lifestyle based on current research? And then we'll talk about what research has really shown about how many drinks can you really have per day? What does research show on alcohol? Can you actually get exposed to toxins and air pollution and not die, or what's the real research on that? And we'll try to put this all together for you. And also very important part of this is we got to make sure you know how to do your own physical exam and laboratory test, so you identify the things that will probably kill you and avoid you from having longevity for you and your loved ones and your patients. So hope you enjoy the course.